Welcome to KBVR's FCC Regulations Training. This training is to help you understand the types of things that can and cannot be said in the air and the requirements associated with our radio broadcasts and television cablecasts. First, we'll provide an overview of the types of licensing our station falls under. Then we'll cover profanity, indecency, and obscenity. We'll talk about the differences, why those differences are important, and specifically what may and may not be said on the air. And lastly, we'll cover several miscellaneous rules that we need to comply with in order to maintain our license and good standing in the community. Because our radio programming is broadcast over the public airwaves, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, regulates the content of our radio broadcasts. Additionally, our license is specifically for non-commercial educational purposes, which creates a few additional rules, which we'll discuss in detail later in this video. Our television programming is not delivered over the public airwaves, but rather over cable using the City of Corvallis Charter. Although FCC does not regulate the content of cable programming, KBVR has chosen to apply FCC broadcasting rules to our television cablecast as a demonstration of our citizenship and role in the community. In order to fully understand what can and cannot be said in the air, it's important to understand the distinction between profanity and indecency and obscenity. Profanity is not regulated or outlawed at all. Obscenity is never allowed on the air, and indecency is allowed, but only during the safe harbors of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Profanity refers to words and phrases that are anti-religious in nature and considered highly objectionable to many people. Using reference to God in vain would be an example of profanity. The word damn is another. Although not unlawful, the key here is that these terms are highly offensive to many people in our community, and their use is considered to be very poor in taste, and should therefore be avoided. For FCC purposes, indecency is defined as, quote, language or material that depicts or describes in terms of patently offensive sexual or excretory organs or activities, end quote. Indecent language is only permitted during the safe harbor hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Obscenity, which is never permitted on the air, is defined using a three-pronged test determined by the United States Supreme Court. In order for material to be obscene, it must meet these three criteria. An average person must find that the material as a whole appeals to the prurient, or lewd, or vulgar interest. The material must depict or describe in patently offensive way sexual content, specifically defined by applicable law, and the material, taken as a whole, must lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. To help you distinguish between these three types of language, let's take a look at a few examples. You air a program of a clinical medical exam that involves extensive and graphic nudity. Is it profanity, indecency, or obscenity? The material as a whole probably does not appeal to prurient interests, and it does have scientific value, so the program would not fall into the category of obscenity. Instead, it's considered to be indecent, and therefore can be shown between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Let's look at another example. If a DJ drops the F-bomb on the air, is it profanity, indecency, or obscenity? Well, it does describe a sexual activity, so it could be considered either indecency or obscenity. However, it has absolutely no literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, so it is actually obscenity and is therefore prohibited at all times. We need to be very clear with the distinction between the language on recorded content and the language that disc jockeys use. Recorded music with indecent content may be broadcast during safe harbor hours. DJs, however, may never use indecent language on the microphone. The FCC requires that all radio stations broadcast their call letters and location every hour as closely as possible to the top of the hour. For us, that means announcing KBVR Corvallis.
KBVR Corvallis.
Please do not get creative with this legal identity or change it in any way. Always say KBVR Corvallis only. Because we operate under a non-commercial educational license, we may not sell advertising. We may, however, accept donations and recognize donors on the air and thank them for their support.
KBVR FM would like to thank
The FCC distinguishes between identifying donors and promoting them. We may not promote our donors by putting out a call to action, such as stop by their showroom or announcing any kind of pricing information. Similarly, it is illegal to receive anything of worth in exchange for on-air announcement. That means you may not mention your favorite pub in exchange for a beer, or mention a business in exchange for anything, no matter how negligible the item may appear. Receiving payment in exchange for playing specific content is called payola, and is punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $10,000. Never agree to pay anything for exchange for payment. It is also against FCC rules to put callers on the air without their knowledge. Therefore, when taking calls that will be broadcast, always answer the phone with, "KBVR, you're on the air."
KBVR, you're on the air.
During broadcasting, you must monitor the transmitter, and once per show, take a meter reading and record it on the green meter reading sheet on the control booth. And lastly, smoking and drinking alcoholic beverages in the studio is strictly prohibited, as is broadcasting while intoxicated. Broadcasting while intoxicated is against both FCC regulations and OSU policy, and is grounds for termination of station privileges. Thank you for your attention during this training video. By carefully complying with the requirements you just covered, you'll help ensure that KBVR's programming satisfies all legal requirements and remains a valuable student and community asset for years to come.